As Liz said, my name is Jackie Sewell, and my only qualifications really for making this presentation tonight is a keen interest in history in general and in the Turners in particular. It's just been some amateur research I've done. Many people have helped me in gathering the information I'm going to share with you tonight. There's too many to name here, but I'm thankful for all their help. The job isn't finished yet, though, and hopefully people who hear the talk tonight or come to the house and have more pieces to the puzzle will come forward and contribute what they know, because it takes a lot of people sharing all the information to get the whole picture. In this day and age, when we can travel to the moon faster than our ancestors could travel from Detroit to Lansing, it's really hard to imagine the world that they lived in. But I think it's important that if we want to have a better understanding of those people, who they were and what they did, that we really need to try and understand the environment and the world they lived in. So tonight, I'm going to be talking about James and Marian Turner in particular. They were the builders of this house, and I think in a real sense they were builders of this city of Lansing. But before I begin talking about them and their family, I wanted to share some early descriptions of Michigan and Lansing that I found from various sources and through various people's help. And this describes the area in the early 1800s, much like it would have been when James and Marian first arrived. The first thing I wanted to read was a poem written by Elijah Woodworth, who was the first resident pioneer of Ingham County. Mr. Woodworth wrote this poem on his 92nd birthday. Well, yes, my friends, I guess I'll give a sketch of how we used to live in the days of the pioneer, when we had for neighbors bears, wolves, and deer, and the mosquito took an active part, and the firefly lit up the dismal dark. Our turnpike then was a cow path, made in a zigzag course wherever they strayed, and our rapid transit to the nearest mart was through the forest with ox and cart. Then we wended our way through the lofty trees, cut out our road wherever we pleased, and our rapid transit to the nearest mart was through the forest with ox and cart. I also have a couple descriptions that I believe Mr. Lawler found and compiled, describing what Lansing was like in 1847. That was the time that it was chosen to be the capital of Michigan. One person, and I don't know who wrote it, described it this way. They were describing the location of their cabin, which was at the southwest corner of West Saginaw and North Washington Street. I think that's right down there by LCC. Serenaded every night by the denizens of an immense frog pond near the cabin, and with clouds of mosquitoes indoors and outdoors adding their plaintive thrills. These and other romantic sights and sounds, like the snarling of wolves, the distant cry of the panther, like a woman in distress, and watching the pretty deer as they fearlessly browsed among the newly made brush heaps, made for us a new and novel experience. And another pioneer described it this way. In the pioneer days, this area was no field of dandelions, but a spring-fed swamp. The swamp was full of poison sumac, skunk, cabbage, willows, and snakes. According to old-timers' tales, it was not uncommon to see water snakes stretched out full length on a log along the banks of the streams. There were snakes of all kinds: striped snakes, green snakes, blue racers, rattlers, black snakes, and during the Civil War, copperheads. So it was quite a different place than we see today, and it's really hard to even imagine. There was another description that talked about downtown area and talked about ravines that were so deep if you stood in one you couldn't even see out of it to see a block away. So things have changed since then. But regardless of how it appeared, it was attractive to people out east. And both James's parents and Marian's parents felt the call to come west to the wilderness. They both came with their families as teenagers, and Marian's sister, who later became Mrs. Harriet Longyear, another prominent pioneer in the area, described it for a news column in the Lansing Journal called Lansing Pioneers, and this is based on her description. Mrs. Harriet Longyear, who was born near Buffalo and came to Michigan in 1837, has many interesting memories of that difficult journey. The family, including father, mother, 5 girls, and 2 boys, traveled comfortably from Buffalo to Detroit on the steamer Robert Fulton. Her father sent 3 hired men with the stock and part of their goods across the Canadian wilderness to join them at Detroit. Various delays kept the men back, and it was a week after Jesse Monroe and his family arrived at Detroit before the men in the stock finished their difficult journey through the forest. It was in the month of October that they started upon their long journey to the distant county of Clinton, where land had been purchased a few miles from the village of Portland, a mere hamlet then of 1 store and 2 houses. 2 heavy wagons carried the furniture and other effects, and a lighter vehicle served for the family. Though it was the dry time of the year, in many places along the way, pits of black mud extended entirely across the roadway, compelling the wagons to turn out into the woods and often to make a passage with the axe. Some days, not more than 5 miles were covered. During the week that the family was on the road, lodging was secured from the settlers who were glad enough to show them hospitality and to hear news from Detroit and the east. At DeWitt, they found a sort of tavern kept by one Scott, who had built a great double cabin of logs. Here the mother and children stayed for about a week, while their father and his men went on to the farm, a farm without a field or fence, merely a tract of dense woodland, and built a log cabin for their reception. A few years later, Abigail Monroe Case, who was Marian's sister, described how rapidly things were improving. And in 1884, she talked at the Michigan Pioneer Society, and she had these remarks to say. The plank road, the first outlet to civilization that the city had, was built by the same energy. Mr. James Turner superintending the construction from Lansing to Howell. A daily line of stages had been run between Lansing and Detroit. By starting from Lansing at 6 in the morning and changing horses every 10 miles, we could reach Detroit between 9 and 10 at night. Now that was progress. They were moving along. I wanted to next talk about James's family, and I have prepared some genealogy charts based on the best information that I have, and later you'll be able to look at those. One of the things I wanted to start out by clarifying is some of the books and articles refer to the fact that James was a descendant of Humphrey Turner, but I didn't find anything to substantiate that. In fact, another, I think he's a relative of the Turners, but he's been doing his own research. He found evidence contrary to that, and so on my genealogy chart, well, I'll get into that in a minute, I guess. But the information basically that we have when we do genealogy is only as reliable as the person who left it to us. And if they were accurate, then we've got good records. Some people weren't so accurate, and I've come across many books that were printed and many news articles that confused generations or had typos or just had it plain wrong. So it does get a little tricky when you're sorting through historical accounts to know what's accurate and what's not. I've done my best to sort through the bits and pieces of information to verify what I could to the best of my ability, to add a pinch of common sense and a little bit of imagination, and from that extract a glimpse of James Turner and Marian. So to the best of my knowledge, James Turner's ancestry can be traced back to Michael Turner, who was born before 1648 and died in Sandwich, Massachusetts. Those are the only facts I have at this time about him. Other ancestors are listed on the chart that I've made and include settlers, farmers, and veterans of the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812. One of his ancestors enlisted in the Revolutionary Army at the age of 62 and went and fought for the cause. But I'll start with Francis Stiles Turner, who was James's father. Francis was a sea captain, and of course that meant they lived over on the coast. And Francis was born, I believe, on August 26, 1776 in New London, Connecticut. He married Deborah Morton on November 4th, 1799 in Middlebury, Vermont. and he died December 22nd in 1836 in Lima, Washtenaw County, Michigan. Francis died shortly after arriving here with his family and left his wife, Deborah Morton Turner, with 10 children. Some of them, the older boys, returned back to New York and found work to help support the family, and later some of them, I know Richard, came back to Michigan and lived here. James was a young boy, probably 16, 15, 17, around that age, at the time his father died. He was apprenticed out or sent to work in a store in Jackson, and some reports I've read said it was owned by a former neighbor from New York. So James left home and worked in the store and soon developed a reputation for being a hard worker and honest worker. In fact, at the age of 20, the store owner gave James and another man the responsibility of going up to Mason and opening a new store there. And it wasn't long before James and, I forget the gentleman's name, it was either Smith or I think it was Hiram Smith.
Yes.
Thank you, I'm getting some nods, yes. They soon bought the store out. So he was a pretty young man to be so enterprising. But all through the records and accounts, I found that James was always very much an entrepreneur. James married Marian Monroe, who came also from a pioneering family. Marian's father was Jesse Monroe, and the spelling of Monroe has changed through the accounts. It's sometimes M-U-N-R-O and sometimes M-O-N-R-O-E. That's the spelling I chose to use. I have been told that I probably have Marian misspelled, that even though we usually assume the female Marian is I-A-N, that her spelling was probably M-A-R-I-O-N. So that's one of the difficulties of genealogy, is changes in spelling and nicknames. But anyway, Jesse Monroe was born in 1790. He married Harriet Parker, and together they had 11 children, I believe, and I don't have the names on a couple of them. But Marian was not the only woman in her family that was quite a force in Lansing. Several of her sisters married other prominent Lansing men. Mr. Longear was a lawyer. Another one married a Turner, married Charles Turner. And Adelia married Daniel Case, who was a very prominent Lansing pioneer. So these three women were quite a, or three or four, were quite a force, and that's a whole other story that somebody someday needs to dig into and research for us. But Marian, I believe, was the oldest. At least I've heard her referred to as the eldest sister. And she was born December 8th, 1818 in Erie County, New York. Her family came out here when she was probably still a teenager. And she became a school teacher. She attended school as a student up in Eagle, and there were some accounts from her former teachers referring to her being in their class. But then she eventually became a school teacher up in that neighborhood, because they didn't have the school district set, so she taught like the kids who lived around. And she was applying for a job as a teacher in the Ingham district, or I'm not sure of where, but anyway, I'll read what her son had to say about how the parents met. This is from a news clipping I found in a family scrapbook, and it was from that same Ingham Pioneers column. And it said it was an address of Honorable James M. Turner before the Ingham County Pioneers at Mason at their annual meeting in 1895. This is what James said. My father, about the year 1840, was one of the school moderators, and candidates to teach the school district, or the district school, were asked to present themselves. Two young ladies appeared, my mother, then Miss Marian Monroe, and a girl who, fortunately for me, was less attractive, being cross-eyed. The former was quickly chosen, and thus the fate of your orator was sealed, as the marriage of my father to this same schoolman occurred the 1st of October, 1843. They were still in Mason at the time, and that's where they made their home for about 4 years, until 1847, when news reached them that the Capitol was going to be built in Lansing, Michigan. And so they James, being the entrepreneur that he was, saw the opportunity to be a part of this new capital and decided to move his family, which at that time had at least 2 babies under the age of 5. And there's one child I have not been able to get a birth date on, so I don't know if that child was born then or not, but at least 2 little toddlers, and set out for that wilderness that I described earlier, which was not much more than a big swamp. So that was 1847, and they set out to come to Lansing. Reports at the time said that there was, I think, 3 houses, and there was the dam was here, and Joe Page was at that site and had a log building that I think was used for people traveling through to stay up. It was basically his home. So there wasn't much here. There were a lot of tents, and as people came in, they put up tents or little shanties as they cleared the land. And that's where he brought Marian, and so their first home in Lansing was probably a tent. But it was shortly after that that he had the lumber processor. I don't know how they did it, but they basically got the house ready down in Mason. I found accounts that alluded to that. And had it brought up along the Hog's Back, which back then there was that big, it was a glacial formation that ran pretty much from Mason almost all the way to Holt and Lansing. And so they brought the house kind of pre-made in Mason up here to Lansing and built it. And this is a picture of what their first house looked like. It originally wasn't that big. They added onto it as their family grew. And that house remained standing in Lansing until the 1920s, at which time, I think that's right, I may have the date wrong, I think the 1920s, and there was talk about making it into a historical museum or a pioneer museum, but unfortunately nobody bought into that idea, and they did tear it down. I believe it stood, as near as I can figure, maybe Geneva you have a better idea, but I think it stood right where they're doing all that construction there as you turned in here on, I get turned around, okay, Dodge River off of Turner. And so I keep hoping they're going to dig something up. But we don't know. His first store was probably also a tent, but then he later built a wood frame store down, I believe, at the corner where Turner Park is on Franklin and Turner. Let me get back to my place. Okay, I'm going to take a little time to talk about their children. The one child that I have not found much information on is Lucien, or Lucien, L-U-C-I-E-N-N-E, or variations thereof, who died, I believe, before 1874 in Lansing. That name is listed in the cemetery records with them. Another child, Harriet Elizabeth Turner, was born about 1844, and she died, I believe, before 1860. I found her on census lists for 1850, but none in 1860. Marian Turner was born November 11th, 1846 in Lansing. Actually, she would have been born in Mason. And she died October 24th, 1918. And she married Nelson Reasoner, but I haven't done much. Well, I have a couple of her children, James Reasoner, Arthur T. Reasoner, and Fisk Reasoner. James Monroe Turner was born April 23rd, 1850 in Lansing. He died July 7th, 1896 in Alma, but he was a resident of Lansing. He had gone to Alma to a sanitarium because he was in poor health. And he was another remarkable pioneer, in a sense, in Lansing, and did a lot to advance the city. And if we have time, we'll talk about him later. A daughter, Addie Turner, was born about 1852 and died she was born in Lansing, died January 30th, 1884. I found a news clipping that referred to her and said that she had spent most of her life in physical suffering, so I assume she had some physical deformity or disease or something that caused her great pain, and she did die then in 1884. Another daughter, Jenny Catherine Turner, was born January 6, 1855 in Lansing, died September 19, 1868, at age 13, and I yes, I found a report that said she died of brain congestion, and I'm not sure what brain congestion would be, maybe a tumor. The sad fact of life in those days was they lost a lot of children young. Eva Turner was born May 18, 1857 in Lansing. She died about March 23, 1925 in Lansing at the home of her son, Alan Black. And Eva married a prominent Lansing man, C.P. Black. Let me make sure I got his name right. I get some of the sons-in-laws mixed up. Cyrenius Black, C.P. Black. He was a lawyer, and I believe also a judge later. They had two children that I found, Alan and Leslie. Alan was a boy and Leslie was a daughter. Anna Turner was born in February of 1860 and died in February of 1860 as an infant. Abigail Turner was born January 23, 1861. She died February 23, 1947 in this house. She lived here after her parents had died. She lived here with her mother even before her mother died. And hopefully we'll get time to talk a little bit more about Abigail, who married Franklin Dodge, and both were quite prominent in Lansing. They had a son, and all I found was a first initial of H, but I think he went by the name Jesse Turner. He was born April 20th, 1864. He died May 28th, 1875 in a carriage accident in Lansing. And I found accounts of that in one of the histories that was written, but I could not find the news account, so I have to dig deeper to find the news article. I would think they would have written that up in the paper. But Thomas Langtree, the servant of the family who was with him at the time, also died in the accident and is buried in the family plot also. I have information on the children, I just don't know how much time we have to go into them. Can someone give me a...
10 minutes.
Okay. Well, let's start with James Monroe Turner, who, like his dad, was quite an entrepreneur and followed in his dad's footsteps. James Sr. was a merchant. He owned a store. He was also a land speculator. He bought land all over the county for himself and also for James Seymour and possibly for other people back in New York, I'm not sure. But we do have specific records that show that he was purchasing land for James Seymour. He built the plank road, then he got involved in the railroad and helped bring the railroad to Lansing and was on the board of the railroad here that operated in Lansing. And when he died, his son, James Monroe Turner, who was just a young boy, after he got a little more schooling, then he came and took over in his dad's place and was very important in the railroads. James Monroe Turner also he owned several businesses, and it amazed me how these men of that era could be presidents of so many different diverse businesses. And he also was into mining and often traveled to the UP and had property up there and was owner of mines and that kind of business. He also owned Springdale Farms, which was a very well-known farm at the site of our Fenner Arboretum now. His descendant, one of his sons, I believe, sold the property to the city later. But at the time that he was living, it was a huge farm and had horses and dairy and was very well known for that. So he was quite important and quite busy in Lansing. He also was the mayor of Lansing twice, once in 1889 and once again in 1895. And his father, James Sr., we're going to get confused between the two, I'll try not to, but was also active in government. And James Sr., I guess I should back up, I have more to tell you about James Sr. He was a state representative for a time. He was, and a lot of that's in the brochure, so you can check up on it later. He was very well trusted, and people trusted him with their money and often came to him for advice on money. So James Sr. was Deputy State Treasurer in 1860. He was a senator from 1867 to 1868. He was also very active in education, and it was to him, as well as to several other prominent Lansing men, that the Rogers sisters came when they wanted to start a college for women in Lansing. They felt that, you know, we had the agricultural school for our boys, what are we doing for our daughters? And they were two women educators, I think, from the Ann Arbor area, so they came to Lansing and approached James Turner and some of the other men of that time and asked for help in getting a girls' college started. And he was very active in helping solicit the funds and donate the funds himself. He was also a member of the school board for the span of his lifetime in Lansing. He was also active in church education and served in his church in the education department as Sunday school superintendent. He was definitely a man who gave a lot to his community. And his son followed in his footsteps a lot. Like I said, he also was active in government. He did run for governor in 1890. He was the Republican nominee for governor. But some of the reports I read indicate that this may have been an undoing for him because he invested a lot of personal funds in his campaign. He did not win. He was not successful in that bid for governor. And it took a lot of his time and energy to recoup the financial loss, or I don't understand a lot of the financial terms they use, but he had somehow put up his holdings as security. He had a lot of property he owned, a lot of businesses, but not a lot of cash flow. Anyway, it really was a setback for him, and it took him a long time to recover from that. But shortly after that, he was elected mayor of Lansing, which I'm sure boosted his confidence that the people in Lansing at least still respected him and supported him. He also, with John Jordan, organized the Riverside Brick Company, which for years worked exclusively on brick for the new state capitol building. He also was a representative at the state capitol. He was the treasurer of the Ionian Lansing Railroad, just as his father had been. He organized a real estate and loan agency called Turner, Smith and Company, and he was president of the Northeastern Railroad Company. Very busy, active man. Abigail also was a very busy woman. She did a lot for Lansing society, much as her mother had. Her mother, Marian, was, I have it here somewhere, in April 20th of 1868, when the First Ladies' Aid Society was organized in Lansing, she was their president. In December of 1877, when the Women's Foreign Missionary Society was organized, she again was president of that group. Abigail and her husband entertained a lot. Of course, with him in politics, they had a lot of things going on at the house. She was quite the cook, we've read, and some accounts have said she even went abroad to learn cooking. She was also a charter member of I better find it and read it, the Lansing Matinee Musicale Society, and we found programs listing her as one of the performers. She and, Abigail, I'm going to get you all confused because I get confused with all the names and generations. Abigail, of course, was James and Marian's daughter, who married Franklin Dodge. And it was Franklin and Abigail who enlarged this house because they did a lot of entertaining. Franklin also was in politics. Probably every man in that generation was in politics, it seems. He was a lawyer and was constantly having people over. He was a very congenial man. And so the original house, as you can see, was much smaller. When Franklin and Abigail bought the house after their marriage, they realized they were going to need more room, so they enlarged it and added this wonderful ballroom where they had a lot of society events and parties and things. And they had many children, but we don't have time to go into them all. And I think I'm going to close, and then hopefully we'll have time for some questions. I hope this brief sketch of James and Marian Turner has increased your appreciation for the remarkable men and women that Lansing is privileged to call their founders. We've just scratched the surface, though, here tonight, as you can see. And James and Marian were joined by a host of other hard-working, risk-taking men and women who, though they may have been afraid, didn't let that fear stop them. They pushed ahead and they came through. And they left a legacy of strength, courage, compassion, and ingenuity to their successors. There's still many untold stories. Just in the Turner Dodge family, we could spend hours talking about the originals and their children, and many interesting people, many wonderful stories. So hopefully we can come together again sometime to hear the rest of the story. And now if someone has questions or information that they want to share, we have a couple minutes left to do that.
Do you have any idea when it was really called the Turner Dodge home? Is that recent? Did we name that recently? Or?
I would think so, when the city bought it here in this, was it the 1970s, Geneva, when the city